If you grew up in the 1970s, chances are you ate things that would get a restaurant shut down today. Red candies that stained your tongue for hours. Diet sodas your mom kept in the fridge by the case. Margarine that sat on the counter in a bright yellow tub. It all tasted normal. It all felt safe. And almost none of it would be legal now. The 1970s were a different world when it came to food. Grocery stores were filled with colors and chemicals and ingredients that nobody questioned. Families trusted what was on the shelf because it had always been there. But over the next few decades, scientists, lawmakers, and health agencies would pull item after item off those shelves. And the reasons why are more disturbing than most people realize. Here are the foods everyone ate in the 1970s that are now completely banned. Let's start with the one that changed the candy aisle forever, red dye number 2. If you remember red popsicles, red jelly beans, cherry soda, or the bright crimson frosting on birthday cakes, you remember this dye. It was everywhere. By the mid-1970s, over 1 million pounds of red dye number 2 were being used every year across $10 billion worth of food, drugs, and cosmetics. Then in 1971, Soviet scientists published a study linking it to cancer. The American public panicked. The pressure on the FDA was enormous. In January 1976, the agency officially pulled the plug. Red dye number 2 was gone. But here is the strangest part of the story. Mars, the company that makes M&Ms, immediately stopped producing red M&Ms. The thing is, red M&Ms had never actually contained red dye number 2. They used a completely different dye, but the fear was so intense that it did not matter. Red M&Ms vanished from store shelves for nearly a decade, from 1976 to 1987, all because of a dye they never even used. Now, if your mom was watching her weight in the 1970s, there is a good chance she had a can of Tab in her hand. Tab was the diet soda of the disco era, and it owed its sweetness to something called cyclamate. Cyclamate was 30 to 50 times sweeter than sugar, and it had no calories. By 1969, about 250 food products in the United States contained cyclamate. Annual sales had hit $1 billion. It was in diet sodas, canned fruits, salad dressings, candy, and even Kool-Aid. Then Abbott Laboratories, the very company that manufactured most of the cyclamate in America, ran a study. They fed rats a mixture of cyclamate and saccharin at extreme doses. 8 out of 240 rats developed bladder tumors. The dose was equivalent to a human drinking 350 cans of diet soda every single day. But it did not matter. On October 18, 1969, the government announced that cyclamate would be pulled from the market, effective February 1, 1970. Overnight, 175 million Americans who had been consuming cyclamate had to find something else. Tab had to completely reformulate, and to this day, cyclamate remains banned in the United States, even though it is approved in over 130 other countries. Most scientists now agree the original study was deeply flawed, but the ban has never been lifted. Speaking of things your mother kept in the kitchen, let's talk about margarine. In the 1970s, margarine wasn't just popular. It was practically mandatory. Doctors recommended it over butter, and families bought it by the tub. It was cheaper, it spread easier, and everyone believed it was the healthier choice. What nobody talked about was what made margarine so smooth and shelf-stable: partially hydrogenated oils. In other words, trans fats. These artificial fats kept cookies crisp, crackers crunchy, and margarine spreadable for weeks. A 1977 USDA study found that the average American was eating over 7 pounds of margarine per year. It would take decades for researchers to prove what trans fats were really doing to the human body. They raised bad cholesterol, lowered good cholesterol, and dramatically increased the risk of heart disease. The FDA did not officially ban artificial trans fats until 2018. For nearly 50 years, the most trusted spread on the American table was quietly one of the most dangerous things in the kitchen. If these stories are bringing back memories of your family's kitchen in the 1970s, hit the like button. It helps more people discover these forgotten stories. And if you are new here, subscribe to Rewind Republic so you never miss our next journey back. Now here is one that might surprise you. Raw milk. If you grew up in a rural area in the 1970s, chances are your family drank milk straight from the farm. No pasteurization, no processing, just fresh, cream-topped milk delivered to your door or picked up in glass bottles from the local dairy. Your grandmother probably swore it tasted better, and she was not wrong. Raw milk has a richness that pasteurized milk simply cannot match, but it also carried something else: bacteria, including E. coli, salmonella, and listeria. In 1973, a federal judge banned the interstate sale of raw milk across state lines. Individual states began cracking down with their own regulations throughout the decade. Today, it is illegal to sell raw milk in about half the states in the country. And the Food and Drug Administration remains clear: raw milk is not safer, not more nutritious, and not a cure for anything. But if you tasted it back then, you understand why people still fight for the right to buy it. Now let's talk about something that was hiding in practically every can in your pantry. Lead solder. In the 1970s, canned food was a staple. Canned peaches, canned soup, canned vegetables. Families relied on it because it was cheap, and it lasted forever. What most people did not know was that the seams of those cans were sealed with lead-based solder. Every time you opened a can, trace amounts of lead were leaching into the food inside. For children, the effects were devastating. Lead poisoning causes brain damage, developmental delays, and behavioral problems. It took years for regulators to act. The ban on lead solder in food cans did not come until 1995. That means for more than 2 decades after the dangers were well understood, families were still feeding their children food contaminated with lead. Every single day. Brominated vegetable oil, or BVO. If you drank citrus-flavored sodas in the 1970s, you drank BVO. Mountain Dew, Fanta, Fresca, Sundrop. BVO was added to keep the citrus flavoring evenly distributed in the liquid, instead of floating to the top. Without it, your orange soda would have looked like a lava lamp. The problem was that bromine, the key chemical in BVO, does not leave your body easily. It builds up over time in your tissues. Studies linked it to skin problems, memory loss, and nerve damage. The FDA had been questioning the safety of BVO since the 1970s, but it took until 2024, over 50 years later, for the agency to finally ban it. For half a century, Americans were drinking a chemical that most of the developed world had already outlawed. Do you remember those picture-perfect apples at the grocery store? Every single one the same size, the same shade of red, not a blemish in sight? There was a reason for that, and it was called ALR. A LAR, or daminozide, was a growth regulator sprayed on apples to make them ripen uniformly and look flawless on the shelf. Throughout the 1970s and into the 1980s, it was standard practice in American orchards. Then, in 1989, a report from the Natural Resources Defense Council revealed that ALR broke down into a chemical called UDMH, which was classified as a probable human carcinogen. The reaction was immediate. Parents dumped apple juice down the drain. Schools pulled apples from cafeteria lunches. Apple growers lost an estimated $100 million almost overnight. Ular was voluntarily withdrawn from the market, and the EPA canceled its food use registration. Those perfect apples your family bought every week had been coated in something that no one would dare put on food today. If you ever ate authentic haggis, you probably had it before 1971, or you had it outside the United States. Haggis, the national dish of Scotland, is made with sheep's heart, liver, and lung, mixed with oatmeal and spices, all stuffed into a sheep's stomach. In the 1970s, especially in communities with Scottish heritage, you could still find haggis made the traditional way. But in 1971, the USDA banned the sale of animal lungs for human consumption. The agency explained that during slaughter, stomach contents can enter the lungs, making them potentially unsafe. That regulation effectively made traditional haggis illegal in America. To this day, you cannot buy authentic haggis in the United States. Any version sold here uses a substitute for the lung, which, according to anyone who has had the real thing, is just not the same. In the 1970s, this next one was considered the height of sophistication: foie gras. French Nouvelle Cuisine was sweeping through upscale American restaurants, and foie gras was the crown jewel of the movement. It is the fattened liver of a duck or goose, and the flavor is rich, buttery, and unlike anything else. The problem is how that liver gets fattened. A process called gavage involves inserting a tube into the bird's throat and forcing large amounts of food directly into the stomach, multiple times a day, for weeks. The liver swells to many times its natural size. Animal welfare organizations called it one of the cruelest practices in the food industry. California banned the sale of foie gras. New York City followed. Several European countries have outlawed production entirely. What was once the most elegant item on the menu became one of the most controversial foods in the world. Let's go back to the candy aisle one more time. Before red dye number 2 was banned, another dye had already been pulled from shelves. Violet dye number 1 gave certain candies, ice cream, and even pet food their distinctive purple hue. In 1973, the FDA banned it after studies showed it caused cancer in laboratory animals. Manufacturers scrambled to reformulate. The bright purple candies and treats of the early 70s simply disappeared. If you remember those vivid purple sweets from your childhood, you are remembering a color that was literally banned. And finally, there was something in the original root beer that most people today have no idea about: sassafras. Real, old-fashioned root beer was made with oil extracted from the root bark of the sassafras tree. It gave root beer its distinctive, slightly medicinal flavor, and it had been used in American beverages for centuries. But sassafras contains a compound called safrole, and in the early 1960s, the FDA determined that safrole was a carcinogen. By the time the 1970s rolled around, any root beer still using real sassafras oil was technically breaking federal law. The root beer you grew up with was either already reformulated or operating in a gray area that would not last much longer. Today, commercial root beer uses artificial sassafras flavoring, and the original taste is gone forever. If you ever tasted root beer at your grandparents' house and thought it was somehow different from what you get today, you were right. It was. Kitchens in the 1970s were places of certainty. Families trusted what they bought. They trusted the colors in their candy, the sweetener in their soda, the spread on their bread, and the milk on their doorstep. They had no reason not to. It would take years, sometimes decades, for the truth to catch up with what was sitting on those shelves. But maybe that is the real lesson here. Our parents and grandparents were not careless. They were trusting. The things they trusted just happened to be the things that nobody had yet bothered to properly test. If this trip down memory lane brought back memories for you, we would love to hear about them in the comments. What did your family eat in the 1970s that you cannot find today? Hit like and subscribe to Rewind Republic. We will see you on the next Rewind.